So happy to have you with us this week for my conversation with Misty Cogdill, who has a specialty that you've probably never heard of. She's the founder of the Handwriting Soul Academy, and perhaps you've heard of handwriting analysis, but Misty is actually, through her own experience of self-discovery, tuned into the energy and quality of letters and the way that we write them, and now applies them through programs to help people be intentional in creating the change they're looking for, increasing their self-awareness, and being a more fully expressed version of themselves. I find this conversation absolutely fascinating. And if you're looking for one more aspect of personal growth or development that you haven't discovered yet, I think you're going to love this conversation. Thanks for joining us. Living in a stressful world doesn't mean you have to give up on happiness. Instead, you can shift your perspective of stress and discover how to live your life in flow. Welcome to Happified. I'm your host, Susie Vine. Join me for inspiration and interviews with folks who are shining their light in the world in the areas of positive mindset, health, and wellness. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome back. I am so happy to have you with us this week to join me in the Happified podcast with my guest, Misty Cogdill. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Her journey to creating Handwriting Soul Academy started when she changed her last name and therefore her signature. It took her years to realize this seemingly small shift had such a massive impact on her life. When she started unraveling the puzzle and creating major shifts by learning how to change her handwriting, she knew it was going to become her mission in life to share these tools with others. Misty created Handwriting Soul Academy to help people unlock their true potential and overcome limiting self-beliefs. She believes that together we can create our best lives. So please help me welcome Misty to the show. Thank you so much for taking time and joining me today.
Thank you so much, Susie, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
And when our paths crossed, I was intrigued. I always love those ways in which we can gain insights into the character of us and, quizzes, that sort of thing. We always love things that affirm or help connect the dots and say, oh, I get that. I see that in me, or maybe that's why I respond this way. And so I was really intrigued. I've always loved the idea of handwriting analysis, and it is used by the FBI. And so to take that a step further and actually be intentional with our handwriting, I was really intrigued. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your path of discovery, because this wasn't something that you just got to sit down and study and apply. It was a very different way of tuning into this for you.
Yes, absolutely. I always look back at it and I'm like, women have been changing their handwriting, their last names, their signatures, after they get married for centuries. There are changes that happen to the neurological patterns of the brain when a woman changes her signature and her last name. But it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you get married and the next day you're a different person, right? It took me about a year before I actually sat down and kind of noticed the shift that had happened. And I just kind of sat back and was like, I'm different. I'm not the same person. Like, what happened? What caused me to change? And how come I'm just now noticing this? Like, how long have I been changed? And, just kind of felt like it snuck up on me from behind, and nobody forewarned me and nobody really talks about it. And when I noticed the change, I asked several people, and it just sounds like, hey, people change. That's the way it goes. And I was like, no, something happened and I need to figure it out. And so the more I tried to figure it out, the more I just got confused and didn't have any answers, and was just kind of left without answers for like 6 years. And then I got divorced, got my maiden name back, and got it didn't happen overnight, But I eventually, within 6 months to a year, got my old personality back. And then again, I sat there and was like, I'm back. How did I get back? When did I get back? What caused me to get back? And then I was like, I something happened. I got to go back and figure this out and put the puzzle pieces together. And that's where I eventually linked it to my name change. And I was like, does every woman know this? Like, there's something to this. And I just became obsessed with studying it after that, and wanted to share with as many women as possible, because it is such a big part of humanity. There's 7 billion people on the planet, and a lot of that population, at least 50% is women. And how many of us are getting married and changing our name and changing our signature? So this is something that's not talked about, and I thought, hey, there's a missing in the world, we need to address it.
And I love that you've taken on this mission, because I think there is a lot to that. And, we think about the difference in changing our name. I took my husband's name when we married 8 years ago, and it was a big choice, but that was as far as it went, was just what I would be known as professionally and the work that I was doing at that time in making the transition and moving forward. And women go through this all the time. Men rarely sit face to face with this choice. So it is an interesting thing to take on. And ultimately, your work, your research, and synthesis of all this information led you to write a book, an Amazon bestseller, actually, that came out last year.
Yes, I did. I've got it right here. You Can Heal Your Life with Handwriting. I wrote it, and it was basically 10 years in the making. It's a lot about my journey and my story, but it shares a lot in there about how I kind of came to understand this and what the cause and effect. I pay attention a lot to the cause and effect law of the universe when it comes to, you do this and then this is the result. And then you look at, the implementation of certain things and then the after effect of it and kind of what plays out with it. So I did a lot of that over 10 years. I've been in real estate. Got to obviously see a lot of signatures with people signing the purchase agreement and stuff like that. And it's been a journey, but yeah, it was an Amazon bestseller last year. And I think it's just women in general have to have there's so many women that I've met and that I've spoken with over the last 10 years, and all of them, have said that, that there was something. And then they say that they had a job change. They related the change to their last name after the course of a year of being married. Either the job changed, or they had to move, or they had a baby. And then they're like, the change was because of that event. And then I said, nobody ever really links it back to the marriage, because it's not like the next day, boom, you're a different person. So that's why it's kind of like it sneaks up on you from behind, because nobody's really paying attention. Nobody really talks about it or addresses it or even says, hey, this is a big deal. This is going to change the psychology of your thinking and who you are as a person. It's going to have a major impact. And, there's how many counselors out there today trying to counsel people. And I'm like, let's just go to the core, and then we can address a big portion of, if you understand this, you can make decisions from that. So I never say that somebody has to change their last name or they don't have to. I just like to educate them and give them a full education on what could or would be, or what, the possibilities are with the education. And then they get to consciously choose, instead of having something sneak up on them from behind. They're like, well, I had no idea this was coming. And then try to live with it, not understanding any of it. If you're educated, women can change their name all they want, as long as they're educated and they're happy with their choice, because they know they consciously chose it because of the education they received. They're like, yes, I choose this. I love this. This fits. And I like it better than my maiden name. Then that's great. If they don't, they can stay. It's whatever their choice is. I just like to give them the power of choice.
Yes, absolutely. And, thinking back in my own personal timeline, I left the work that I was doing 5 years ago, but that shift started about 2 years prior. So thinking of how that timeline unfolds, that was about a year after I married Dan and took on his last name. And we talked about this when you and I met earlier, and talked about all this. My last name previously was buck, spelled with a B, and now it's a V, vine. And so it's really interesting to see some of the changes. And but this is a little abstract for some people. And I know that you have some experience, some students who have gone through your program or people who have worked with you as their coach and experienced really dramatic shifts. And so is there one story that stands out that you'd like to share?
Yes, I always enjoy telling the story of a gentleman, Andrew Shell, who was a client of mine. He is someone who's very hard worker. He's done everything under the sun with personal development, very good. Was earning $8 million a year. He's in finance, doing extremely well. And he always kept hitting the same numbers all the time. And he's like, I've got some sort of a block. And so no matter what he did, he was always, achieving the same numbers, and other people were achieving, higher numbers. And he's like, there's something missing, and he couldn't quite figure it out. Then he heard me speak. And then I ended up talking with him, and he's like, okay, he's like, maybe there's something to this, and he showed me his handwriting, showed me his signature. And I said, yeah, I said, you have several blocks. I could see it right there in his handwriting. I highlighted it. I explained exactly what was going on and what, needed to shift and why, and what, the cause and effect was. And he's like, well, I learned how to write like this in grade school. He's like, this is the way I was taught. And I said, I know the way they're teaching in grade school is wrong. I don't want to say wrong, but it's not beneficial. It's not serving your highest and best and bringing you to your soul's true potential. And he's like, okay, well, what do I do? He's like, okay, I'm going to take your course. And within the course of 4 months, like it was so much fun, because he'd call me up and he had a lot of vivid dreams, and, a lot of things are shifting and changing, which happens a lot in my program. People will say, things are like being rewired, because they're shifting, they're changing, they're advancing to their highest, truest potential. And he went from 8 million to 12 million in 4 months. And so he would call me up. He's like, is this stuff for real? Is this magic? I'm like, no, it's science. Science backs up all of this. We're just shifting literally the blocks and advancing you with the true potential of what's there, and not limiting you anymore, because there were some self-sabotages found in his handwriting that when he removed them, he was able to literally advance. And his wife is a teacher, and she was wanting to learn more about it as well, because she's like, well, if we're not teaching it correctly in school, then we need to look at this and maybe make some changes. So it was a dramatic story, and obviously I love that one. Not everybody has the same story as he does. But the bottom line was there was self-sabotage in his handwriting. He removed the blocks, and allowed him to reach his full potential of what was there. And all the work that he had done prior, it was like adding gasoline to a fire. That's the analogy I used. You build the fire, and then I come along and show you, here's some gasoline that's going to kind of amplify it, of what you've already built and what you've already done. So for everybody, it's just advancing them to their potential and what's meant for them.
And I find this so fascinating. I mean, there are, we don't learn handwriting in schools the way that we used to, that very, very structured, lots and lots of rote practice. Rote, not spelled with a W, but funny that it sounds the same. And, very, very common lettering. And for generations, you can kind of tell the age of a writer by the style of their handwriting. It's such a traditional style and format through generations. I know my mom's handwriting looks like so many moms' handwriting from her generation, right? Who went to school in the 60s and 70s. And then my grandmother's writing, had very unique characteristics. And so what are some of those letters that come to mind, from that more traditional? Kids these days aren't learning cursive the way that we did, but some of that kind of traditional format that people might have picked up.
Yeah, the traditional format, I always say, was very limiting. And the way that we were taught, in the 60s was a lot of cursive, and that cursive was very, I guess it activates more of the ego side of the brain. It activates more of the limits and the way of thinking that is limiting, thinking, oh, I can't do that, or oh, I can't do that. So the fact that they've actually removed a lot of the way we used to write in grade school, with that cursive handwriting, like the big bubble A, the figure 8 S, the backwards D, which some people are like, what's the backwards D? And then like when you're going from the bottom up instead of from the top down. But there's a lot of over 80% of it I've actually highlighted in my courses and shown exactly what was going on. And it just brings about a different way of thinking. You go from I can't do this to hey, I can. And so the kids in grade school nowadays, they're not necessarily being taught the most beneficial way, but they're not being taught the most limiting way like they used to. So I'm like, hey, we've moved it up a notch. So at least I'm starting here in the middle instead of way back here, because emotions get attached to that way of writing and get drawn into the subconscious and into our psyche. So if you're bringing them at least to the middle and they're just neutral and they're just doing more print instead of cursive handwriting that was limiting, then I've got one step ahead to where it's like, okay, it's not going to be as big of a shift, because it'll be easier for them to transition than if they learn the way we were taught back in like the 60s for writing. So I say it's a good thing. And we're making progress slowly but surely.
And thank goodness, thank goodness we're making progress. And you've described it as being intentional or selective in the way that you want to be in the world or move forward. Can you illustrate that? Because you really do that so beautifully.
Yeah. So I go back to my story was my grandma was born a girl, and going back to looking at her handwriting, she was somebody who was abused. She was supposed to be born a boy to help out on the family farm, and her abuse showed up in her handwriting. And I, as her granddaughter, hung around her quite a bit. When you're little, you go to grandma's, you get cookies, grandma does what grandmas do. And you just kind of start to take on certain patterns from the family lineage, and as you take that on, and then you grow up and you live life, and you're just kind of like, hey, what gives? Like this, this that's playing out, on a certain level, you're like, this isn't fun. I took on family lineage and I was like, this is not what I want to play out in my life. And when I became intentional about my handwriting and started to change my handwriting, I literally started to clear generational patterns that had limited me for years. And the more that I cleared the patterns, the more I was able to clear 7 generations back and literally start to intentionally create the life by my own design instead of by what was given to me hereditary, which there was a lot of pain in the past from generation after generation. So to be able to clear and heal that, and to be able to move forward and live a life by my choice and by my design, being intentional and consciously choosing and being awake with my intentions, and using handwriting as a tool for that, and being able to see where the limits were in my handwriting and where the shifts took place that now allow me to advance and then stay consistent with it. It really allowed things to open up and flow. And I now have been doing things that have never been done in my family lineage before. So I didn't come from a family of strong. I came from my mom was very strong, but women that aren't necessarily viewed as more than just a housewife or something like that. So I'm definitely moving mountains within my own life, within my own family, and I love to encourage other people, especially women, to do the same. That it is possible and that you can make changes.
I love that. And I think that intention is everything to do with it, and awareness. Once we have an awareness that there's a way in which we can choose to make a shift, then we have that available to us. We sometimes don't even know where to begin to look. And so you mentioned some of the letters that are more limiting, or like the backwards D. I think that's funny. I always thought that was weird to have you start at the bottom and go to the top. I'm glad I rebelled against that. Uh, and
Actually new.
and some of those closed loops, maybe limiting. So what are some letters or shapes that are a little more open or empowering, or what are some, it's hard to describe without, like a chalkboard, if you will.
Yeah.
But if you can give us some ideas.
Yeah, well, one of them that I talk about, and I have a picture of, I don't have it with me, but the whole alphabet. A lot of the alphabet, I would say like over 50% of it, they did little loops at the top, like a loop at the top by the M, or a loop at the top by the letter N, or the letter V. They do like this little loop, or trying to think some of the other letters, they would do like a hook on the C. All of those little hooks or those little loops were actually creating jealousy patterns within our mindset. And I thought, who wants to play in that? I'm like, no wonder why women and men, and like the arguing and all the drama that comes from jealousy patterns and how that all plays out. I was like, that's very hurtful to society. It's hurtful to our psyche. It's hurtful to our self-esteem. It's hurtful to our self-image. Like, there's nothing but negative that comes from that. And I was like, if I can sit here and be a voice and be like, don't do that, please, for the love of yourself and for the love of other people that are around you, stop doing that. You will find more self-love within, and it'll help your self-esteem, your self-image, like all of that. Like, I just want people to come from a more loving place, because jealousy can do some ugly, ugly things. And that is one pattern that I would want to remove from everybody's psyche if I could. But that's one to name, several of them. I could go on and on about all of them, but every letter of the alphabet has a pattern, energy, and lesson to it. And really, if you really want to dive deep, the first letter of our first name is our biggest challenge in life. First letter of our last name is our life path, and our middle name is what we're intentionally seeking on an unconscious level and don't even know it. But it all has an energy. And if you were to change your name, you would actually change your experience of life, as I did when I got married. I didn't change my first name, but I changed my last name. And in that different experience, some people either like it or they don't. But regardless, it gives you a different experience. And so from that experience, if we would have been given a different name at birth, a different first name, we would have had a different experience. Literally, it would be like an identity shift, an identity change. And I talk a lot with people about the first letter of their first name, because that's what we took on from our parents. It's like the moment you're born, you're given a name, and that name has patterns, energies, and lessons to it. And our parents, gave us that name. So it's like an energy exchange. We take on the areas that they struggle from those patterns and lessons and energies from that name. And then we take on their stuff, so to speak, and then they get to master it and be an example of it for us. And then, we live life. And then you include brothers and sisters and all the above, and there's all kinds of stuff that gets thrown in the mix. But the bottom line is the first letter of our first name is our biggest challenge in life. Once we overcome it, it becomes our greatest gift to humanity. So overcoming that is basically learning how to write it correctly, working with the patterns. There's there's different ways to do it that I talk with people in my courses that we take, or that I've taught, and people can really choose. But then they're like, okay, well, this is what I got to work through. This is what I'm overcoming. This is how I'm overcoming it. And they're doing it intentionally. And then, they're consciously aware of it. So for example, with my name, and we could talk about your name next too, but with my name starting with an M, it's all about letting go of control and allowing divine grace to work through you. So any area that my parents had control issues, I took that on and tried to control everything. And the more that I would write the M in the correct way, because the way I used to write it was very limiting, the more that I write it, the more that I work through it, the more that I let go, the more that I flow, the more that I can embrace and just allow, instead of, oh my gosh, I have to control everything. And so I've come a long way in 10 years. So I can just imagine, I've looked at, for example, Taylor Swift's handwriting, and I see the way she writes her T's. And yes, the woman's extremely successful, and is great. And at the same time, everybody still has struggles in life. Just because they're successful in one area doesn't mean they're successful in another. Because I don't think that she's married or has found a happy relationship. We all have areas that we can work on in life, and it just kind of can support you to see an area that we might want to advance in and allow us to grow and develop and become our best selves. And hey, every little bit helps. So, but yeah, it's every letter has a pattern, energy, and lesson. And the more you get to know people, the more that you can recognize that, and then you can start to you could pay attention to your coworkers, pay attention to your family members, pay attention to your friends. Like, hey, what energy is around me? And do they have self-sabotage in their writing, because they might be bouncing that energy off of you, and you just get to be aware and intentional about it.
And so was one of those patterns in the M, the little loop, that traditional little, you start with a loop and go to the round or hooped.
Yeah, so getting rid
letters.
of that, and then not retracing the M strokes, and kind of having it pull apart. The other part in my signature with my T, anybody who has loops in their T, my grandma had them really bad, but you would draw the T and it would like go up, and then you'd have this big old loop, and then you'd do the crossbar. But when you have that loop, you're actually writing the letter L, not the T. And so when you activate the L and then you put the line through it, it's like a sword through spirit, and it's actually energetically causing a negative impact on the psyche. And then when you go out there, it's like, negativity, please come to me on an unconscious level. And you're like, no, please don't. But you're writing it that way. You don't know you're writing it that way. And then all of a sudden you're like, why me? Well, because it is you. You're the one writing it. You're the one that doesn't know about it. You're the one who's not intentionally, but you're the one who's attracting it unconsciously, and you don't know what you don't know. And then you're sitting here, and then you're like, oh, this and this and this. And then again, you're like, why me? And it's like, well, let's educate you so that you can undo that. And then you won't say, why me anymore. You'll say, oh, I got good luck, instead of the opposite. But knowing about it is half of the journey. Figuring it out and understanding it is half of the journey.
And so in the book that you wrote, it's more about your process, your discovery.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with my journey and my story. I do give some examples of the letters in there, and the most beneficial way to write it and why. I didn't do the full alphabet in there, just because I have worked with some people that I've had to literally stop in my program and have them not continue, because it was changing so much of the psychology of their mindset that they were it was too much for them. This is not a journey that's for just anybody. Somebody who's done a lot of personal development work, and somebody who's ready to because they are stable, that they can handle the changes that will take place, because emotions will come up, certain patterns will be challenged, and you really have to have a lot of self-awareness to be able to do this journey. And some of the clients that I have taken on, I've literally stopped and said, you know what, let's I'm more than happy to give you your money back. I'm more than happy to put things on pause. Let's revisit it when you're a little bit stronger and able to take this kind of work on, because it is a challenge. And it is something that I like to be there to answer questions. I like to be there to support people. I like to be there to answer. I've done and studied this for 10 years. I know it like the back of my hand. When something is going on with somebody, I'm very intuitive. I usually 95% of the time can figure it out. And if I can't, you give me a day or two and I will have it figured out through the patterns of questions that I ask. So I like to, have that support for people, because when you're messing with, I don't want to say messing with your mindset, but when you're making conscious changes, this is, you want to do it in a loving way and not just, anything and be like, oh, let's just bumble along and try this. Well, there can be, there's cause and effect to everything. And I always like to say, hey, let's go the best route possible instead of trial and error.
Right. And it does, we definitely benefit from the perspective of someone who's gone through that process themselves, obviously, but also the experience of seeing other people go through that process and
Right.
being aware of some of those sticky points we might find.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. And, when people can say, all right, I'm ready for this. And then, it's one thing to talk about something, and all of my clients, I have said this so many times to them, it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to experience it. And once they start in my program, they start with the journey and they're like, holy cow, you weren't kidding. And I'm like, I know. And then they're like, now I get what you're talking about. And they're like, no, oh, no, well, wow. And just people's reactions to, it's one thing to talk about it, but when they start experiencing it, it's a whole nother thing. And then it's like the light bulb goes off in a whole nother way. And then they're like, all kinds of questions come up that weren't there before. And then they're experiencing. And then every week we get on the coaching calls. We've got group coaching calls. And then they're, asking questions. And then they're like, okay, well, I experienced this. And I'm like, okay, this is what that's caused by. And then they're like, oh. And then they're noticing the cause and effect. So it really is a deep education, but a deep dive into our psyche and just really what's there and what we're dealing with. And I always try to come from the most loving place possible and say, hey, we got to come at this with eyes of love, no matter what, because it's a journey.
And so, and I know you have some ongoing programs or opportunities where people can connect with you if they're curious. So what's a way how people can get started or see if this is something that if their curiosity is piqued, do they want more? How do they know if they're ready?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I've got my website, so you could go to www.handwritingsoulacademy.com. You're able to click on my calendar and book an appointment with me there. I do have a webinar on LinkedIn and Facebook tonight at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, where people can come and watch my webinar. It will be recorded, so if there's somebody that is finding out about this a little bit later, I could always send them the recording later. But it really is something that I do have a Facebook group that people could check out, Handwriting Soul Academy, the public Facebook group. It's a private group for the public. But I've gone live in there several times. So when you just clicking in there and getting in there, there's tons of information with different videos and different teachings that I've shared. There's a 5-day webinar or 5-day masterclass that I did that's posted in the guide section with a workbook that I did for free back in June for people so they could watch that. There's a lot of different things. And then as well as I've been on YouTube on several other podcasts, and every question creates a new curiosity. So that's been a fun journey as well. But yeah, the best way would be to go to my website, handwritingsoulacademy.com, and click on my calendar and book an appointment.
I love it. So rather than trying to get the short track and say, what's my power letter? What's my creativity letter? And going and filling pages with it. We need to have a little more strategy and intention in how we begin calling down some of these shifts.
I always say people can send me a sample of their handwriting when I have an appointment with them. And then I'll be able to look and give them a couple of things that I see in their handwriting, and then share with them what they would get obviously out of the course and what's there and what they really want to take on. But I do a process of questioning to see how much personal development they have done, how much awareness they've done, or how much awareness they have to be able to really take on a program like what I've got, because it's a journey.
And I know that you have started a children's book, and I think this is such an exciting little project that in its own time will unfold. But can you give us an idea what that might be about, we can keep an eye peeled.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually called the Cave of Wonders, and it's all the little kids. I just kind of I started it years ago, and it's interesting because I got to the letter S and I have not finished it from the letter S on to the letter Z. And my aunt pointed out, she said, "Isn't that interesting that you stopped at the letter that's at your father's name? My dad's name starts with an S." So I think there's something that I'm working through still. Any which way, it's really fun. It's every letter of the alphabet wants to be the child's friend, and it's hey, I'm the letter A. I'm happy you're here. Will you be friends with me? If you write me like this, I can help you do this, and then it kind of explains all the different things with it. So it's been a fun journey, and one that I hope to complete soon. But yeah.
Well, and I think to our earlier point in the conversation when we were talking about, at least without the extra guidance, kids are kind of starting from scratch rather than starting
Right.
with a setback.
Correct.
To have something fun and engaging like this, that, from that starting point, it would be fascinating to see where we could go if we can bypass some of those patterns that we acquire, rather
Yes.
than simply following
Having
our own path.
Absolutely, having the children start out with this by age 5, right out of the gate, and not have, what everybody else was given back in the 60s or the 50s or whatever, would move mountains. Like, they would be so far ahead, and I always wonder what my life would have been like if I would have had this at age 10 instead of figuring it out at age 30. But or age 28 technically, but yeah, it's something that I think would advance humanity. It would advance the children tremendously, and something that I would love to see in the school system someday. But there's a person out there for that specific task, and when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So I always say, maybe there's something I still need to learn or do to be able to attract that individual person who can help with that.
And maybe they're listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's a journey, but it's fun.
Hmm. And along the lines or the theme of Happified, are there any letters that have a happier energy or vibration, or are calming innately? Anything that comes to mind?
Yes, the letter Z is the letter of peace. And I am not a doctor. I do not prescribe medication for anybody. And I always say consult with your doctor before going off any medication. But I have had several people that I've spoken to that I've worked with that have started writing the letter Z that had a lot of bad anxiety. And they start writing the letter Z, and then they're like, huh, my anxiety's gone. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that interesting? You don't need to pop a pill. You just need to shift the mindset, and it transforms itself. And then they can make their own opinion and their own judgment through their own experience. But I do know several people who can attest to they are very, very happy that they write that letter now.
Well, and it just makes me think, we've always had catch some Z's, and peace or sleep does require a bit of peace of mind to slip into. So
Yeah. Yeah.
light bulb moments. I love it. And I don't want to forget too, I love your way of describing the intention or choosing your mindset or outlook, kind of like changing your wardrobe or your
Yes.
perspective.
Yes, I've done several different experiments with the letters, and I couldn't quite figure out. I'm like, how do I explain this to people? Like, I could feel it, I could see it, but I was like, there's no way I can ever explain this to anybody. And eventually, it came to me that it's when you're writing a specific letter, you're activating a certain energy, a certain pattern, a certain way of a characteristic trait, and when you're activating that, it's going to feel a certain way. So there's certain letters for confidence, there's certain letters for creativity, there's certain letters for learning and evaluating. And when you access those letters and you work with them, you're taking on a new viewpoint or a new shift or a new way of thinking. And when you're doing that, the analogy that I came up with is like wearing different colored glasses or wearing a different outfit. Like if you put a shirt on over your thinking, it's like, like I have a purple top on today, and it's like, oh, do I like the purple, or should I wear yellow, or should I wear orange? If I was to wear different colored glasses and I was to wear blue, I would literally see the world through blue glasses. If I was to put on orange glasses, I would literally see the world through orange, like everything would have a tint of orange to it. Well, when you write a specific letter and you're focused on specific words with those letters, like, the letter T versus, the letter Z, it's like blue glasses versus orange glasses, and you literally will see something from a different perspective and from a different shift that would take place. And it's like, oh, I see the world in blue. Okay, well, that's like the letter T. And then you're writing that letter, you're accessing the benefits from that letter, you're accessing the energy, the vibration, the patterns, the lessons, all of that comes with it. And then you're like, okay, I'm done with the blue glasses. Let's put the blue glasses down. Now let's put on the orange glasses, which we'll just call it the letter Z. Now I can see the world through these glasses. And now everything has a tint of orange, which, for example, as an example, the letter Z, all of a sudden it's like, I'm free about that so much. It's just this simple. Or, I really don't think I should overthink that too much. Or I really don't. I was really stressing about this, and there's no reason to be stressed out about that. Like all of a sudden you're looking at the world through these orange glasses, and you're like, I really like these orange glasses. I think I want to keep them on for a while. Let's just wear these orange glasses every day for a while. Okay, well, let's just write that letter a little bit more every day. And then you just kind of can adjust into that new outfit. If you want to say the glasses are part of your outfit, then you can. But that's it took me years to put that analogy together, because I was like, how in the world do I explain this to anybody? It took me quite a while, but I also give the analogy of ketchup and mustard, which is like our mindset is like a container, right? And we've got all of our experiences in this container, and we call that life, right? And so I always think of like a bottle of ketchup, and it's a bottle that squirts out at the bottom. So if you squeeze that bottle, you're going to get ketchup that comes out. But if you start to do personal development work and you start to, maybe write new letters, and I always talk about the power of questions, and you just start kind of shifting and doing all of this work that you do in my courses, then I always say it's like literally cutting the top off. And then as you squeeze the bottle, you're still getting ketchup that comes out, but you're starting to input mustard, and then eventually you're going to continue to squeeze out ketchup the more and more that you do. But the more that you squeeze out ketchup, the more you're filling it up with mustard. Eventually, mustard is going to come out of the bottle and is going to be what you're trying to create, what you're intending. Like I've got several people writing all different kinds of things and all different kinds of things they're wanting to manifest, they're wanting to attract. And it's literally the analogy of that. Eventually, mustard's going to come out. And so it's like building a bridge. And when they understand that, and they're like, okay, I haven't got to the mustard yet, but I'm still going, I'm still writing, but getting it through to the other side. That's one of the analogies that I use for that as well, to be able to explain in simple terms, like exactly what's going on with our mindset and how to shift things and what to be aware of.
And I think that really helps, because I think sometimes we get, in whatever manner we are taking a closer look at the way we are or be in the world and what we want to create, we get frustrated that there's no light switch. So I love that image that, we've got to kind of clear the cache and let some things work out so that that benefit starts to be realized.
Yeah, it took a while to come up with that analogy too, but once I did, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And it makes it so simple to understand. And it's like, we just have to keep doing the work. We just have to keep implementing, and eventually it does pay off. And we might not see it the next day, like so many people, you order something off Amazon, you get it the next day. People are like instant. We want things fast. But this is a journey, and it's one that it's like you just got to have the patience to work through. Eventually the mustard will show up.
The fruits of our labors.
Yes, definitely.
I love it. I love what you share and the way that you make it relatable and tangible, and that, you have your ongoing webinars or sessions where people can drop in as they come across the episode, as they discover your work, or when it comes back to them, they have that light bulb moment and they say, maybe I'm ready to write myself a new story.
There you go.
They can get in touch with you.
They get to start a new chapter or write a new book.
Yes. Every day is a fresh page. So
yes. And it's a blank canvas. You get to create what you want. That's the beautiful thing, is once you clear the stuff from the past, then you're intentional in saying, hey, I want to create this today.
Right?
Yeah.
I love it. Once we're free of that other stuff we've been carrying around and had applied to us.
Right.
All the rest of that old story.
Right.
I love it. I always love connecting with you. I think it's so much fun to explore the possibility of this. And I hope that that people will play with that potential as well. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap up today?
The thing I always like to share, the one tip is a lot of military and people that are like ER in the ER, or firefighters, or people that are police officers, they have to write in all capital letters. And when they write in all capital letters, it does disconnect them a little bit from their emotions. And they do that, it's intentional. They write in all capital letters. They have people write in all capital letters to have them be able to do the job that they need to do in order to, not get caught up in emotions like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. So for a lot of men, but women also, if they are writing in capital letters, just know any family member or anything like that may feel, and I've interviewed and spoken with so many people that they feel like their significant other or whatever is at arm's length. So I've worked with several people, but one gentleman in particular that you don't know what you don't know. And he was writing in all capital letters, and I explained, because he was in the military and he came back and he's like, everything's fine. And it's like, well, you might think it's fine, but there is a little bit of a disconnect. His 3-year-old son was not a cuddly son. He was just, a 3-year-old baby and, doing what 3-year-olds do. But he was not like cuddly with his dad. And, he didn't think anything of it. He's like, my kid is fine. Everything's wonderful. I said, that's great. I said, let's go through the program and then we'll see what the results are, because he did write in all capital letters. And we had him shift and he went through everything. And at the end of it, he was blown away and he goes, nothing was wrong before, but boy, things sure did get good. And he goes, the biggest gift that he received was his 3-year-old son was actually cuddly and started to respond to him and be a cuddly 3-year-old that just wanted his dad. And he goes, oh my gosh, he goes, it's like his son just opened up. And I said, that was your energy field, that not that there was a disconnect there, but it was energy that was almost like a block that was not allowing him to respond to him in the way that he maybe wanted to. And once that block kind of got lifted and removed, it kind of opened the door and he got to just have that heart to heart instead of, the wall being in the way. And he got to experience his 3-year-old son for his 3-year-old son, and in that open-hearted atmosphere. And he goes, I did not know what I did not know. And that was just because 3-year-olds, they don't know any different. They're just being themselves. They don't know how to be anything other than who they are. And so for that experience, that really touched my heart to be like, isn't that beautiful? And then his wife, he said, they were fine before, so he thought, And he goes, things just became incredibly wonderful between him and his wife. And so I was so happy to hear the journey between that opened up. And so I always say, if there's anybody, and I talk about it in my webinars also, anybody that writes in capital letters, you might want to, pay attention, be a little bit more aware. It's one thing to write it at work, but just to do some of the side work outside of work, to have the relationships in your life be a little bit not so guarded. So if there's anything I could share, there are a lot of military men that were, maybe over in Vietnam, that were wounded, and there's a lot of trauma that kind of got stuck from what they experienced, what they saw, what they did. And if they changed their handwriting, it could actually open the door for them psychologically. And then I would still say, definitely work with a counselor, but it would allow some healing, you got to be careful with that word, some transformation to take place within and for them that could open doors and work through some of that, instead of have the PTSD, and kind of actually heal it or transform it on levels that they couldn't have access to before. So anyone who knows anyone in the military, definitely look into it.
Oh, fascinating. I definitely do. I'm from a military family, and I think that's really profound. And it goes back again to what you were saying at the beginning. This is a piece that fits best when people have also done other work. Yes. This isn't a starting point or a finishing point. This isn't the one step to transformation, but it can start to unlock or amplify, bring a little lighter fluid to some of the other work and intention that you have going on, if you're looking for ways to shift or to optimize or to have transformation. Yes,
absolutely. And it's a journey. Like our life is a reflection of the questions we ask, and the deeper questions that we ask, the more stuff comes to us. And so that's why that quote, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's people are drawn to things or attract things to them when they're ready at the right time. So, someone might be listening right now, and somebody might be listening in 6 months. Well, they're ready in 6 months. They're not ready right now. There's a lot of things that go at play, but I always say there's a bigger purpose beyond us that we're not necessarily, that we can't see, that's got their hands in play with all of it.
I love it. And definitely. And the way that we play into, this experience that we share with everyone around us.
Yes.
Too.
It's like Earth School. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience in Earth School, and it's all about the journey of awakening.
Beautiful. I'm so grateful for your time and stories and insights. And I hope that there are some ahas or light bulb moments, and we'll make sure that all your information is in this show notes so people can connect with you there.
Okay. Thank
when
you.
They feel called to do so.
Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you so much, Misty. This has been great.
Yes, thank you for having me on your show. It was an honor to be here, and I'm happy to make a difference for someone somehow in some way.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in today. Check out the show notes for any links we mentioned. To learn more about living life with less stress and more flow, visit happifiedlife.com. And if you found value in today's episode, make sure you subscribe to catch the next one, and leave a review to help fellow pod surfers find Happified. Until next time, keep on shining.